Right during our Christmas dinner, my son slapped me across the face in front of all our guests. I stayed silent. The next morning, I laid out a lavish holiday spread. He smirked and said, "Finally, you've learned your place, Mama," right before he saw who else was sitting at that table. But before we continue, please tell us in the comments what city you're from and how old you are. We love getting to know our community. Enjoy the story. Amidst the joyful holiday songs blaring from the television, my own flesh and blood struck me in front of everyone. The entire room plunged into a deathly silence that very second, and I stood frozen in the middle of the floor, feeling as if the soul had been snatched right out of this old body. I couldn't utter a single word. The following day, I prepared a breakfast so grand the table was practically groaning under the weight. When Akeem saw the feast, he wore that same smug, crooked smile. "Looks like you finally learned, Ma," he tossed out casually, as if he were praising a submissive housekeeper instead of his own mother. But suddenly, that triumphant look vanished. It was washed away by pure terror when his eyes met the figure sitting at the head of the table, right where I always sat. My name is Makeda Vance. I am 66 years old. For my entire professional life, I worked as a senior accountant. I lived among numbers, dry reports, and complex balance sheets where the debits and credits had to align. Always. My husband passed away early, leaving me with a spacious historic brownstone on Chicago's South Side and a young son named Akeem. I used the cold precision of my profession to navigate our small family through every financial storm. We went hungry at times, we pinched every penny, we saved dollar by dollar just to keep this house, just so Akeem could go to a private school and walk through life with his head held high, free from the complexes of poverty. There was a time I thought the balance of my life had finally leveled out, the debts were paid, the assets accumulated. I thought I could finally breathe and enjoy the net profit of my old age alongside my son and grandchildren. I was wrong. I was terribly wrong. The most hopeless, uncollectible debt of my life turned out to be the son I loved more than anything in the world. That evening I had gone down to the kitchen. The whole house was filled with the scent of sorrel tea with cinnamon and cloves. It was simmering in a large pot on the stove. That smell, it was the smell of memories, the smell of those Christmases when my husband was still alive. Akeem had been a hungry little boy back then, always circling my feet, waiting for me to give him a taste of whatever was in the pot. I took a spoon, scooped a little, and tasted it. Sweet, warm, right. In that moment, the fragile peace shattered. The kitchen door swung open so hard it nearly flew off its hinges. In walked Khadijah, my daughter-in-law. Wearing a tight silk dress, flaunting the curves she was far more proud of than her character, she didn't even offer a greeting. She hadn't spoken a kind word to me since the day she moved into my home. Khadijah wrinkled her nose and waved her hand in front of her face as if she smelled something rotting instead of holiday spices. "Oh, Lord," she drawled in that piercing voice of hers. "Mama's brewing that sugary swamp water again. How many times I gotta tell you? That cinnamon scent clings to my hair and my clothes. My girls are coming over later. I'll die of shame if I smell like a soul food cafeteria from the 70s. I put the spoon down. The sound of metal hitting the granite countertop was dry and hollow. I tried to speak calmly, the way a person does when they've spent years swallowing their own tears. "This is Akeem's grandmother's recipe," I said softly. "Your husband used to love this tea." Khadijah huffed and smirked with blatant contempt. She brushed past me, opened the fridge, grabbed a bottle of expensive imported sparkling water, and slammed the door so hard the jars rattled. "Akeem likes vintage wine now," she threw over her shoulder. "Things should have class, not be this backcountry sludge, Ma." After those words, she kicked the trash can at my feet. It skidded against the wall with a loud bang, spilling bags everywhere. "Ugh, always a mess in here," she muttered, and walked out. Her heels clicked sharply on the tile. Click, 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 like a hammer against my skull. I stood by the stove, staring at the pot. It was still bubbling, still filling the kitchen with the scent of the holidays. But inside, I had gone cold. This hadn't been my home for a long time. I was just the old help here, a ghost to be ignored in the very house I had sacrificed my youth to pay for. The living room was booming with hip-hop and holiday hits. The guests began to arrive, family, Akeem's business associates, the curious neighbors. I smoothed out my dark velvet dress, took a deep breath, and tried to paste on a social smile. I had to keep appearances, not for myself, but for my son. As soon as I entered the room, I saw her. In the center of the floor, like a peacock strutting in borrowed feathers, stood Imani, Khadijah's mother. She was draped in oversized gold costume jewelry that jingled with every move. She had a wine glass in her hand and a voice loud enough to drown out the TV. "Oh, my goodness," she exclaimed upon seeing me, but her eyes slid right past my face to scan the room. "Didn't I tell y'all? This place looks exactly like it did 20 years ago. Nothing's changed, old and dusty, just like the lady of the house." A ripple of laughter went through the room. That laughter cut my ears like a blade. I looked at Akeem. He was standing right next to his mother-in-law. He heard it all. He knew I had just been humiliated. And what did he do? He put on a fake grin, looked away, took a bottle of top-shelf tequila, and poured some into Imani's glass, avoiding my gaze. "Try this, Mama Imani," he said softly. "It's the good stuff." He chose to appease the woman who had just dragged me through the mud instead of standing up for his mother. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just old age. It was the pain of betrayal. Dinner began. We sat at the long table covered in a white linen cloth. I took my seat at the head, the seat of the mistress of the house, but I didn't feel like the mistress. I felt like a stranger, like an intruder at someone else's party. Khadijah and her mother had already flanked Akeem on either side. They were serving each other food, laughing, acting like I didn't exist. Imani started the attack first. Chewing on a piece of roasted turkey, she turned to Akeem and said loudly, "Listen, Akeem, you remember little Malik, the boy from down the block, your age?" She leaned in. "Well, I heard he just bought a 5-bedroom mansion out in the suburbs and put the whole thing in his wife's name. Now that's what I call a man, a real provider." Akeem flushed and downed his third shot of tequila. The alcohol was starting to do its work. His eyes were becoming bloodshot. His pride was stinging. He glanced at Khadijah. She sat there with her lips pursed, picking at her food, acting bored. She let out a heavy, performative sigh for the whole room to hear. "Of course," Khadijah drawled. "Malik is smart. He's ambitious. But we have a problem." She shot me a look as sharp as a knife. "The problem is that some people cling to property like a life raft, scared their children might actually own something. We live in this big house, but the fact is we're just tenants. We want to renovate the kitchen. We got to ask permission. We want to change the curtains, and we get looked at like we're tearing down the walls." Silence fell over the table. Every eye turned to me. Curious eyes, judging eyes, even pitying ones. They weren't looking at the Makeda Vance who had worked her fingers to the bone to raise a son. They were looking at a greedy old miser, just as my daughter-in-law had painted me. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I laid down my silverware. The clink of metal against the china broke the heavy pause. I looked Khadijah straight in the eye, then turned to Akeem. My voice was level but firm, the voice of a senior accountant that used to make junior staff tremble. "This house," I said slowly, emphasizing every word, "was built on the sweat and the tears of your father and mine. I told you both from day one, when I close my eyes for the last time, it's all yours. But as long as I am alive, as long as I am breathing, nobody has the right to demand a split or a sale. This is my home, not collateral for your greed." Imani let out a loud, raspy, mean laugh. "Oh, Makeda, you are something else. You got one foot in the grave and you're still clutching onto square footage. You're really that stingy with your own son? You accountants really do count every cent, even with family. What, you gonna take the deed to the grave with you?" Akeem, egged on by his mother-in-law, emboldened by the tequila, and blinded by my years of silence, suddenly sat upright. He felt like he had to be the big man at the table. He stood up abruptly, his chair clattering to the floor. "Shut up, Ma!" he screamed, making the glassware rattle. "Don't you embarrass me no more. I'm tired of hearing about your sweat and your tears. I'm done with it." I looked at him. This man I had sat up with through the night when he had the measles, the boy I sold my only gold wedding band for just so I could pay the right people to get him an internship at the bank despite his mediocre grades. Now, he looked at me like I was the enemy. "Akeem, you're drunk," I said quietly. "I ain't drunk," he yelled, his face turning an even deeper shade of red. He felt his authority wavering in front of his wife's family. He wanted to prove he was the boss, that he didn't live under his mother's thumb. And then he raised his hand. For a second, everything froze. I saw that hand, large, rough, calloused. The same hand that used to be tiny and warm, gripping my finger when we crossed the street. That hand was now flying toward my face with the speed of pure resentment. Crack. The sound was sharp and dry, like a branch snapping. My head snapped to the side, my hairpins flew out, and my updo came undone. I immediately tasted salt in my mouth, blood. I felt the skin at the corner of my lip split. The music in the room died instantly. The entire room went stone cold. Not a sound, not a breath. The glass in Amani's hand was frozen midair. Khadijah's mouth was open, but in her eyes I saw a twisted flick of satisfaction. I stood there, pressing my palm to my cheek. It burned like a hot coal had been pressed against it. But my heart was ice. I didn't cry. Strangely, there were no tears at all. I looked at Akeem with wide eyes. He stood there, breathing heavy, his hand still trembling from the impact. At first, a flash of horror crossed his face, as if he couldn't believe he'd just struck his mother. But when he saw I was silent, that I wasn't screaming or fighting back, the horror vanished. It was replaced by defiance. He thought I was afraid. He thought that slap had finally broken his stubborn old mother. I slowly lowered my hand and looked at the blood on my fingers. My blood. The very blood I had drained from my own strength to raise him, and he had given it back to me like this. "Well then," I whispered, though no one heard me. I turned around. Without looking at anyone, I walked toward my room, passing through a wall of whispers. Every step was heavy, as if I were carrying sacks of cement, but my back remained straight. I am Makeda Vance. I would not fall in front of these vultures. Once I reached my room, I locked the door. Darkness enveloped me. I leaned against the cold wood and slowly slid to the floor. That's when the pain hit for real, not on my skin, but deep in my gut. I heard something snap inside me, like glass shattering against stone. I thought this was the bottom of hell, that this shame was the limit of the tragedy. I was wrong. My silence that night and the celebratory breakfast the next morning, that was the real beginning. The beginning of a destruction none of them could even imagine. Now, imagine if you were in my shoes. A mother, struck by her own son in front of a room full of people, just so he could win the approval of his wife and her mother. What would you do? Would you sit and cry? Would you run away and slam the door? Or would you quietly, silently start preparing a reckoning they would remember for the rest of their lives? Tell me in the comments what you would have done. And don't go anywhere. In the next part, you'll see just how terrifying a mother's silence can be. The room was dark. Only the yellow streetlights from the south side filtered through the gap in the curtains, casting long, uneven shadows on the old hardwood floor. I sat in front of my vanity, a heavy mahogany piece my mother gave me for my wedding. It had seen me as a bride. It had seen me weeping when I buried my husband. Now it was a witness to the greatest humiliation of my life. I clicked on the small desk lamp. The dim, warm light hit the mirror. A stranger looked back at me, an old woman with tangled hair and sunken eyes. A bruise was already blooming on my left cheek, spreading, swelling, burning. The mark of 5 fingers was clear, as if someone had pressed a glowing palm into my skin. I reached out to touch it, but stopped halfway. It hurt. The pain throbbed in time with my heart. I pulled out the top drawer. The familiar scent of old salves and balms hit me. My fingers found the tin of cocoa butter I always used for bruises and aches, for myself and for Akeem when he was little. Out of habit, I opened it, took a little on my finger, and reached for my cheek. Then I froze. "No!" I said aloud, my voice raspy like sandpaper on wood. I threw the tin back into the drawer. It shut with a loud click. I won't use it. I won't dull this pain. Tonight, I want this bruise. I want to see it every time I look in the mirror. This isn't just a wound anymore. It's a seal of my own foolishness for raising a predator instead of a son. I sat in the dark, staring into nothing. Memories flooded back uninvited. 20 years ago, a sweltering summer night in Chicago. The power was out in the neighborhood, and our small rental felt like an oven. I was sitting at an old sewing machine, pumping the pedal, the fabric rustling under the needle. I was sewing dresses for pennies just to make it through the month. Sweat was pouring down my back, and my stomach was cramping from hunger. I had only eaten half a sandwich that evening. I saved the other half for Akeem's breakfast. He was sleeping on a mattress on the floor, sprawled out like a kitten. He was clutching a cheap plastic action figure, the toy I had bought him for his birthday after skipping lunch for a month. I looked at his face. In his sleep, he looked like an angel. I fanned him all night so he wouldn't be hot. My arm ached, went numb, but I didn't dare stop. I was afraid he'd wake up and cry. When my husband died, the whole family told me, "Makeda, sell the house, go back to the country. A widow with a kid in the city? You'll drown." But I heard myself very clearly back then. No, my son will live here. He will go to a good school. He will be better than the rest. I endured it all. I kept the promise I made over my husband's grave. My soft hands turned calloused. I sold my wedding jewelry, the most sacred things I owned, to grease the palms of the right people to get Akeem a job at the bank. I built a fortress for him out of my own bones and blood. And tonight, that same hand I used to kiss before bed rose up and broke my heart. I looked at the photo of Akeem in his graduation gown on the wall. He was smiling so wide, so confident. Now, that smile looked fake. I realized the bitter truth. I hadn't raised a son. I had raised a monster, and the food for that monster had been my own blind sacrifices. From downstairs, the sounds reached me. The party was over. The guests were gone, but the house wasn't asleep. I heard footsteps, the clink of dishes, voices. I stood up. Quietly on tiptoe, I went to the door and pressed my ear to the wood. I wanted to know what they would say after a son had struck his mother till she bled. Would he regret it? Would his wife make him come up and apologize? "What were you thinking, Akeem?" That was Khadijah's voice, angry, irritated. I held my breath. For a second, I wanted to believe she was scolding him for hitting me. "Have you lost your mind? Why did you hit her in front of everyone?" But the next sentence drove a nail into my heart. "You shouldn't have hit her," Khadijah hissed. "You should have pressured her to sign the papers. Now she's pissed off. She's going to cling to that deed even harder. You ruined the whole plan." My heart dropped. She didn't care about my pain at all. All she cared about was the document for the house. "Oh, hush," Imani's raspy voice chimed in. "A slap in the mouth is fine every now and then. Old people need to be shown who's in charge. They get stubborn, they cling to their things. You put them in their place once, and they learn. Don't worry, son-in-law. Pour another drink." I heard the liquor pouring, the glasses clinking. They were toasting to my bruise, to my humiliation. And then, in that noise, came Akeem's voice, slurred, drunk, pathetic. "Mama was bleeding," he sighed, stumbling over his words. "I might have gone too far, Khadijah. She's still my mother." My heart flickered for a second, a tiny spark of hope. Was there something human left? "Shut up," Khadijah snapped. Stop being a baby. Look at Malik down the street, how he takes care of his wife and kids while you're still hiding under your mama's skirt. She's been running your life forever. That's why she still controls the house. It's time to handle this like an adult, even if it means disciplining your own mother." There was a pause. I waited. I waited for Akeem to object, to say, "No, that's too much." But then came his heavy exhale. "You're right," he said quietly. "Fine. I'll talk to her again tomorrow." I slid down the door to the floor, covering my mouth with my hands so I wouldn't sob out loud. The last spark of hope went out. He didn't regret hitting me. He only regretted making his wife uncomfortable. He had chosen his side, and there was no room for his old mother on that side. The clock struck 3 in the morning. The house went quiet. I heard faint snoring from the master bedroom, the largest room, the one I had given to Akeem and his wife. I stood up. My legs were stiff, but my head was suddenly clear, just like it used to be in the office when I had to balance a ledger by dawn. I went to the bathroom and turned on the tap. Cold water hit the sink. I washed my face, rinsing away the dried tears and the sticky feeling of self-pity. I looked in the mirror again. The reflection was different now, not the soft, kind, always forgiving Makeda they were used to. A wounded, cornered animal looked back at me with a cold, sharp gaze. I went back to my room, opened the closet, and pushed aside the old quilts. Deep on the shelf was a small metal lockbox. I pulled it out, turned the code, 0630. Akeem's birthday. The irony. My own hand had set the code that now protected my assets from the very person I did it all for. The box clicked open. I took out a thick folder of documents, the deed to the house, the will I had written 5 years ago, naming Akeem as the sole heir. I didn't look away as I took that will and tore it in half, then again and again until it was just scraps of paper. The will was gone. From this moment on, I was writing the rules. From the very bottom of the box, I pulled out an old, worn address book, yellowed pages, faded ink. I flipped to the letter S. I stopped at the name, Attorney Alistair Thorne. An old friend of my husband's, a legal shark. He had helped us with a difficult case years ago, and I had never forgotten it. I hadn't bothered him in 10 years. I didn't want to be a nuisance. But this night wasn't about being polite. I picked up my phone. The screen flared in the dark. 3:15. For a normal person, it was too late to call. For a reckoning, it was just the beginning. I looked at my shadow on the wall, lonely, but still straight. "Akeem," I whispered into the void. "You were right. Tonight, I really did learn something. Compassion for the wrong person is poison. It kills you. You want power? You want to see who's the boss in this house? Fine. Tomorrow morning, when the sun comes up, you'll see. I won't hit, and I won't scream. I'll do what I do best. I'll follow the law." I pressed the call button. The long rings stretched out in the silence. 1, 2. Finally, a sleepy, gravelly voice answered. "Thorne speaking." "Alistair," I said steadily, without emotion. "It's Makeda. I need your help. Tomorrow morning." That night would change the fate of everyone in that house forever. I hung up and set the phone on the nightstand. The trap was set, and downstairs my arrogant tenants were sleeping soundly, never suspecting that their next breakfast would be their last in this home. And here is the big question. They think they've locked away a helpless old mother, but what happens when they realize they've locked themselves in a cage with a cornered beast? 2 days passed, 2 long, thick days since that Christmas night. The air in the house was as heavy as lead. Akeem and I lived under the same roof, but we were no longer family. We were 2 ghosts who occasionally crossed paths in the hallway and looked away. That morning, I walked out of my room and saw the aftermath of their revelry. The living room was a disaster. Empty wine and champagne bottles littered the floor. A mountain of unwashed dishes sat in the sink. A sour smell hung in the air. On the table, a stale cake was being swarmed by ants. And there, in my late husband's favorite leather armchair, sat Imani. She was sprawled out like a queen in a thin silk nightgown, showing no regard for her age or the fact that she was in someone else's home. Her bare feet, dirty on the heels, were resting right on the polished coffee table I had spent a lifetime dusting like a holy relic. She was eating sunflower seeds, spitting the shells right onto the rug. A layer of white shells already covered the floor around the chair. I looked at it, and the blood rushed to my face. My husband never let anyone sit in that chair like that, let alone put their feet on the table. For him, it was a sacred spot, and now this woman was trashing it like a bus station. "Imani," I said, keeping my voice from shaking. "The holiday ended 2 days ago. When are you planning on going home?" She didn't even turn her head. She spat a shell onto the rug and stared at the TV. "Oh, hush, Makeda," she drawled. "Why you so tense? Your girl Khadijah isn't feeling well. She's been nauseous all morning. Probably pregnant. Who's going to take care of her? You?" She snickered. "You can barely walk. I'm her mama, so I'm staying. You ain't much use at your age." I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms. I knew Khadijah wasn't pregnant, but it was too early to say that out loud. The time hadn't come yet. "The house is big enough," Imani continued, finally turning her grease-smeared face toward me. "Ain't like it's crowded. In the end, this is going to be Khadijah's house anyway. What's the harm if I stay and keep an eye on things for the future grandkids?" She emphasized the words, "this house," as if it were already hers. In that moment, the doorbell rang. Loud, persistent. I went to open it, but Khadijah was already coming down the stairs. She was in a silk robe, her hair perfectly curled, trailing a cloud of expensive perfume that briefly masked the smell of dirty dishes. She brushed past me like I was invisible and went straight to the door. I stayed in the living room doorway, listening. The door opened. A man I didn't recognize stood there with a tape measure on his belt, a folder of blueprints under his arm, and a laser level in his hand. He looked at the house with the same calculating eye a butcher uses on a carcass. "Hello!" Khadijah gave him that bright, fake smile I had never once seen directed at me. "Come in, please. We need everything measured." My chest tightened. "What's going on here?" I asked, stepping into the hall. "Who is this?" Khadijah sighed like a preschool teacher explaining something to a slow child. "Mama, what century are you living in?" she drawled. "People don't keep houses like this anymore, this closed-off little kitchen. It's dark and stuffy. I want a modern open-concept space. Tear down the walls, combine the kitchen with the living room. It'll raise the property value, by the way." "Nothing is being torn down," I said. My voice was low but steady. "This is my house, and I do not give permission to break anything." "Akeem agrees," Khadijah parried effortlessly. "Don't you, baby?" I turned. My son was sitting at the dining table, buried in his phone. A plate of cold eggs sat in front of him. "Akeem," I called out, "did you call this man? You want to tear down the walls of the house where you grew up?" He flinched, slowly raised his head, but wouldn't look me in the eye. "Ma," he muttered. "The place is old. Everything's dark and heavy. Let the young people decide how to live. You're gonna be—" He trailed off, swallowing the end of the sentence. But I understood. "You're gonna be dead soon anyway." In their minds, I was already gone. They were already dividing up the space for after my funeral. The architect, seeing that he had the man's approval, spread out his blueprints and marched toward the kitchen. He started measuring, tapping on the walls. But then Khadijah said excitedly, "Wait, let's go back there," and pointed toward the end of the hall. My heart sank. At the end of the hall was a small room with a window facing the garden. That was my husband's study. His desk was there, his books, his glasses, his photographs. I had kept it as a small sanctuary, his corner, the place where I talked to him when things got unbearable. "This will be the perfect yoga studio," Khadijah chattered, leading the architect to the door. "Huge mirrors on this wall, mats over there. All this old junk can go to the dump or the basement, the altar, the books. It's all just in the way." To the dump. It felt like someone had punched a hole in my head. In that second, something in me snapped. I rushed forward, stood in the doorway, and spread my arms wide. "Nobody touches my husband's room," I shouted, the sound echoing through the hall. "Over my dead body! You'll carry me out first before you touch a piece of his furniture." Khadijah recoiled, her lip curling. From the living room, Imani let out a scoff. "Oh, look at her!" she yelled. "The dead are dead, Makeda. The living matter. You're holding your son back with all these portraits and candles. He can't move on because of you. Always mourning the past." Khadijah frowned. "Mama, can you not be so dramatic? The architect is watching." "I don't care who's watching," I rasped. "This is my husband's study." "Akeem," I called out. My eyes locked on my son, who was seeing and hearing everything. "This is your father's room. Are you really okay with turning it into a gym? Throwing his memory into the basement?" Akeem stood up, sighing heavily. He walked over, looked around. You could see him being torn between us, but he wasn't going to choose me. "Ma, don't make a scene," he said tiredly. "It's just a room. Dad's been gone a long time. How long you gonna live in the past? The man's got work to do, and you're screaming for the whole block to hear." And then he did something I never expected in my life. He reached out his hand, not to hug me or stop me, but to push me aside. He didn't hit me like that night. No, he just firmly, confidently shoved me out of the way, like an inconvenient piece of furniture. I stumbled, my back hitting the cold wall. Spots danced before my eyes, but I stayed on my feet. Akeem was already leading the architect into my husband's room. Khadijah was beaming like she'd just won a war. Imani spat another shell onto the rug without looking up. I was left alone in the hallway. I heard the tape measure clicking inside the study, measuring the walls, the hammer tapping to check for studs. Those sounds were like nails being driven into a coffin. In that minute, I realized something terrifying. This house wasn't a home anymore. It was a trap. And I was the old, weak prey surrounded by starving hyenas. They didn't just want the square footage. They wanted to erase every trace of my husband, shove me into a corner, and then completely blot me out of this house and their own memories. I didn't scream anymore. I realized loud words were just empty air here. The weak cry, the strong act. I turned around and walked silently to my room. I locked the door, the sounds outside muffled. I sat on my bed and picked up my phone. I dialed that same number I had called at 3:15. This time, Alistair Thorne's voice wasn't sleepy. It was professional. "Yes, Makeda, I'm listening." "Alistair," I said calmly, almost without emotion. "You said you'd have the papers ready. Is everything set?" "Practically," he replied. "The drafts for the eviction and the property dispute. I just need your final decision." I looked at the door. Behind it, Khadijah was laughing, excitedly discussing something with the architect. I heard through the thick wall, "If we tear this wall down, we can make a huge kitchen studio." Imani chimed in, "You gonna take down that old chandelier? We can sell it as an antique." "It's set," I said. "My decision is final. I don't just want the eviction papers. Please prepare a complaint for assault and for unauthorized management of property without the owner's consent." There was a second of silence on the other end. "Understood," Alistair said seriously. "I'll get everything filed. We can meet tomorrow morning to sign. Are you sure?" I closed my eyes. I saw my husband's chair with that woman's dirty heels on it, his study with a stranger measuring the walls, my son shoving me from the door, the slap in front of the guests. "Absolutely," I said. "If I don't stop them now, I won't just be gone on paper. I'll be gone for real." "Fine," he said. "Everything will be ready tomorrow." I hung up. Outside, Khadijah laughed again. If we get rid of this wall, it'll be gorgeous. Light, space. Can you imagine, Ma? Amani answered, Yep. And throw all that old furniture on the curb. We'll get Makeda into one of those senior communities and finally live like people. I smirked. They still had the energy to make plans, divide rooms, and imagine themselves as the masters of the house. They just didn't know that right now, in a lawyer's office, the papers were beginning to rustle. The first pages of a case that would soon knock on this door, not with an architect's tape measure, but with the cold authority of a police badge. And here is the interesting part. While they're dreaming of a new kitchen and a yoga studio, they have no idea that very soon they won't be discussing design. They'll be discussing sentences. They say there is no pain worse than when a stranger betrays you. That's a lie. The worst is when the knife is in a loved one's hand and they look you in the eye and smile. That afternoon, the sky over Chicago was covered in black clouds. It was muggy, sticky. The air felt like a storm was coming. In the house, it was just as heavy, suffocating. The front door slammed. Footsteps in the hall. Akeem was home from work. I was sitting by the window, knitting a gray sweater. The yarn rustled in my fingers. My mind was a void. He came into the kitchen and set a pink cardboard box on the table with the logo of a famous local bakery, one of my favorites since I was young. The smell of sweet dough and vanilla filled the room. Ma, his voice was gravelly, forced. I bought you some pastries. Those vanilla ones you like. I didn't look up. I kept knitting. Put them down, I said. They won't run away. He pulled up a chair and sat across from me. His hands toyed with the edge of the box, his fingers trembling, a childhood habit when he was lying or had done something wrong. Ma, about the other night, he started and hesitated. Khadijah is just impulsive. You know that. She's just thinking about our future. Don't hold it against her. I put down my knitting and looked at the box. The scent of fresh baking was strong, but to me, the room smelled of a cheap bribe. Akeem, I said softly, tell me honestly, do you really think I'm in your way? He jerked his gaze to the window, where the first heavy raindrops were crawling down the glass. No, Ma, it's just, he sighed. You're getting older. The house is big. It's a lot to manage. Khadijah just wants you to rest, to not be stressed. She's good. She just has a sharp tongue. Don't be so sensitive. To rest, I repeated bitterly, or to be gotten rid of. He pushed the box closer to me, as if the pastries could muffle the meaning of my words. Eat, Ma. Sugar lifts the mood. We're family. Nobody wants you hurt. I looked at my son and realized he hadn't come to repent. He had come to smooth things over, to lull me into a false sense of security, to sprinkle sugar on the path they were using to lead me out of my own house and straight into a nursing home. That night, a real storm broke. Rain poured in sheets. Thunder rattled the window frames. I tossed and turned in bed, my joints aching, my cheek throbbing. My heart wouldn't let me sleep. Toward dawn, I decided to get up for a glass of water. The house was dark. Only flashes of lightning occasionally illuminated the closet, the chandelier, the table. I walked through the living room and suddenly stopped. Khadijah's tablet was glowing with a pale blue light on the table. She had left it on, probably after drinking wine and watching shows. Or maybe she was just sure an old woman like me couldn't even unlock a screen. I was going to walk past, but my eyes caught a headline on the screen. It said in large letters, Medical Evaluation. Patient, Makeda Vance. Everything inside me went cold. I stepped closer, my trembling finger swiping the glass. I read every word, and every word hit like a sledgehammer. Diagnosis: early onset dementia. Symptoms: forgetfulness, paranoia, aggressive behavior. Recommendations: declare patient partially incapacitated. Appoint a guardian to manage assets. Consider transfer to a long-term care facility for safety and supervision. The facility they mentioned, Silver Oaks. I knew it. It was a gray building out past the industrial zone, a warehouse for the elderly discarded by their children. It smelled of bleach, sour porridge, and loneliness. I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. I wasn't crazy. I remembered every cent of our expenses for 30 years. I remembered dates, names, numbers. But here, on some doctor's portal, under my name, the sentence was already written: incapacitated. Footsteps. Khadija and Amani were coming in from the balcony through the sliding door. I quickly turned off the screen, put the tablet back, and hid in the dark corner by the fridge where the streetlights didn't reach. The door clicked shut behind them. The damp night air rushed into the room. Khadija and her mother were tipsy, wine glasses in hand. They didn't turn on the light. The streetlights were enough. "So that doctor is definitely gonna sign?" Amani asked loudly, letting out a muffled hiccup. "Because honestly, I think the old lady's still got her wits. Her eyes are mean." "Don't worry, Mama," Khadija replied, her voice tired but smug. $2,000 makes a doctor's conscience very flexible. Dr. Sterling has everything ready. That scene on Christmas was the perfect excuse. We'll say she started having fits, attacked us out of nowhere. Akeem could barely hold her back." "Who's going to believe her?" Imani smirked. "A lonely old woman against a happy, loving family." I covered my mouth with my palm to keep from gasping. They were turning everything upside down, making the victim the aggressor. They were going to turn the blood on my lip into proof of my insanity. "You're a smart girl, daughter," Imani said, clinking her glass against Khadija's. "We'll put her in that Silver Oaks place, sell the house, and finally live like real people. Akeem is like Play-Doh. He'll do whatever you tell him." In that moment, a voice came from the hallway. "Y'all not in bed yet? It's late." Akeem walked into the room, rubbing his eyes. He was just in sweatpants and a tank top. He yawned, looking at them. I froze in the dark, barely breathing. Khadija immediately went to him, her voice dripping like honey. "Honey," she said, taking his arm, "I settled everything with Dr. Sterling today. Next week, you'll take Ma for an evaluation. He'll sign the papers saying she needs a guardian, and that's it. She'll be under professional care in a good place. We can finally live normally." Akeem was silent for a long time. Through the rain and the rhythmic tapping on the glass, I could only hear his heavy breathing. "Do what you think is best," he finally said. "Just make sure she isn't suffering, and do it quietly. I don't want the neighbors talking like I'm a bad son." He didn't want people to think he was a bad son. But the fact that he had agreed to dump his mother in a warehouse for the elderly behind her back, that didn't bother him. They whispered a bit more and went to their rooms. The living room was empty. Only I remained in the darkness, staring at the glowing rectangle of the tablet on the table. I stepped out of the corner. My body was ice. I couldn't feel my hands or feet, only a heavy weight in my chest. From my robe pocket, I pulled out an old flip phone, the one I had charged and hidden just in case they tried to take my smartphone. I opened a message. Briefly, without extra words, I typed to Alistair Thorne, Plan B. I pressed send. The screen blinked. The message went out to where papers were already rustling and documents were being prepared. I walked to the window. The rain had stopped. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten. "They think they've locked me in," I whispered into the dark. "They don't realize they've locked themselves in a house with a cornered beast." The morning of their supposed victory was loud. Below, I could hear the clink of glasses, whispering, suppressed laughter. Khadija and her mother were discussing renovations, the color of the walls, how much they could get for my antique furniture. I lay in the dark, listening and staying silent. Around 3, it all went quiet. Doors shut, footsteps faded. Akeem's snoring echoed down the hall. The house fell into that thick silence that only happens before dawn. I got up. The hall was dark. Only the nightlight by the circuit breaker flickered. I walked quietly to the front door, checked the lock, the chain. I slid the chain off, turned the key, then dropped a little vegetable oil on the hinges, and slowly opened and closed the door a few times. The wood didn't creak anymore. Good, I whispered. Let them in without a fanfare. I went to the kitchen, sat at the table, and opened the upper cabinet where no one ever looked. I pulled out a small black flash drive. A month ago, when Khadijah started acting up, I had bought a tiny nanny cam and hidden it in the corner of the kitchen disguised as a nightlight. I thought I was being paranoid, but that camera had recorded everything. The slap, the blood, Khadijah theatrically throwing my husband's photo frame onto the floor, the three of them calling me crazy behind my back. Alistair Thorne had helped me transfer those recordings to the drive. He had also printed out Khadijah's text exchange with Dr. Sterling, screenshots I had secretly taken while her phone was on the couch. I laid the drive on the table next to the salt shaker, right where I could accidentally nudge it toward the lawyer in the morning. Then I took a thick envelope out of my bag. Inside were all the papers, my assault complaint, the police report, and the results of a private psychiatric evaluation that said in black and white that I was of sound mind and fully functional. I tucked the envelope under the tablecloth at my seat. Then I turned on the stove. Blue flames licked the bottom of a heavy pot. Water began to hum. I pulled beef, cabbage, and rice from the fridge. I began to roll stuffed cabbage, collard green style, with practiced, steady hands, leaf after leaf, roll after roll, tomato sauce, spices, bay leaves. The knife tapped against the cutting board as I minced onions and garlic, rhythmic, steady, like a surgeon's heart before an operation. In another pot, I heated up some gumbo I'd made the night before. On the small burner, I boiled milk for cocoa. I added cocoa powder, sugar, a pinch of cinnamon. The scent of chocolate mixed with the scent of spices and savory meat. The kitchen filled with that domestic warmth that makes people want to come home. Only I knew that tonight this scent would be the backdrop for a sentencing, not a reconciliation. I took out the fine china I had saved for 30 years, white porcelain with a delicate gold rim. We had only used it a few times, for our wedding and for my husband's wake. Today, I was setting these plates for the funeral of the old soft Makeda and the birth of a new cold one. I set the table. 1 plate for me, 3 across for Akeem, Khadijah, and Imani, and a 5th one at the head of the table. I laid out the silverware, a glass, a napkin. Let him see it. It's not an extra plate. It's for the person who will be the most important at this table today. I wiped the table, smoothed the cloth, set down the platter of hot stuffed cabbage, the bowl of gumbo, the bread, the tea, and the pot of thick cocoa. The kitchen looked like a picture from a magazine, a perfect family breakfast. When I finally turned off the stove, the sun was rising. I went to my room, changed into a strict black dress I only wore for court or funerals. I combed my hair, pinned it neatly, and set a timer on my phone for 7:30 so I wouldn't accidentally doze off. But sleep was impossible. 8 o'clock. Sunbeams fell across the table. The steam from the food rose into the air, golden in the light. I stood by the wall, hands folded like a servant. I watched the clock move toward the appointed time. Footsteps on the stairs. First, Imani shuffled down in a bright robe, but with her lipstick already on. Behind her, Khadijah came down on tiptoe in a light floral dress. A bit later, Akeem walked out in the suit he usually wore to the bank. His tie was a bit crooked. He kept tugging at it nervously. They entered the kitchen and froze. "Whoa!" Khadijah couldn't hide the greedy glint in her eyes. "Look at this. Mama decided to redeem herself at the last minute." Imani sniffed the air loudly. Smells good. Like home. If you'd always treated us like this, Makeda, maybe we wouldn't have to think about where to put you." I lowered my head slightly. "Come in, children," I said softly. "Eat while it's hot." They sat down. For the first few minutes, they ate like they hadn't had dinner. Spoons clinked, sauce was wiped up with bread, cocoa was gulped down. "The stuffed cabbage," Akeem mumbled with his mouth full, "just like when I was a kid." Khadijah cut him a look. "You didn't appreciate it back then, but now you see how hard Mama is trying. If you," she turned to me, just stayed quiet and did your work like this, nobody would be sending you away. Just live quietly. Don't get in our way, and everyone will be fine." Imani chewed a large piece of bread and pointed her fork at the ceiling. "That chandelier," she said under her breath, but loud enough for me to hear. "If we take it down and sell it as brass, that's a nice little chunk of change. I'll put a modern crystal one in its place." Akeem served himself more. After a few seconds, he looked up and gave a lazy smile. "See, Ma, this is how it should be. You listen to me and Khadija, do what we say. You'll live in peace. You'll know your place. It'll be easier for everyone." The words cut, but my face didn't twitch. I stood by the wall, hands folded. The clock showed 8:15. They were close. Khadija suddenly stopped chewing. She looked at the head of the table. "What's this circus?" she asked, nodding at the empty place. "Who'd you invite, Ma? A fifth wheel? Or do you really think Daddy's ghost is coming to save you?" I looked up. At the head of the table was indeed a perfectly set place. Plate, glass, silverware, napkin. No one was sitting there. "Daddy's gone," Khadija continued with a sneer. "Nobody's coming down from heaven to sign your papers. No lawyer's going to help you if the doctor's got a seal." I slowly straightened up, lowered my hands, and squared my shoulders. Everything inside me clicked into place. Imani noticed and stiffened. "That's not a place for a dead man, Khadija," I said steadily, my voice echoing through the room. "And it's not for a saint. It's for the person who is going to escort you out of this house. Permanently." The fork in Akeem's hand froze halfway to his mouth. "Ma, what are you talking about?" He frowned. "Did you take your meds?" Khadija flared up, jumping from her chair. "Are you serious? You lost your mind? We were going to put you in a nice place and you're pulling this stunt?" I looked at them, their full, irritated faces, the plates with the food I had labored over. And suddenly, it felt lighter, as if I weren't in my own kitchen anymore but watching a scene from afar. "Finish your meal," I said calmly. "This is the last breakfast you will ever eat in this house for free." At that moment, the doorbell rang. A firm, confident ring. Once, twice. Silence fell over the kitchen. Someone dropped a spoon. It clattered loudly on the plate. Khadija went pale. "Who is that this early?" she whispered. I turned to the door. "Let's find out," I said. "Eat up, before it gets cold." I walked into the hall. Every step thrummed in my chest, but my legs were steady. I slid the chain, turned the key. The door opened slowly. Behind it was the morning light, cold air, and silhouettes blocking the doorway. I looked up and saw 3 people. At the front was Alistair Thorne, a sharp gray suit, a worn leather briefcase, and a gaze so confident it was clear. This was a man with power. Next to him was a tall man in a Chicago Police Department uniform, with a hard face and hawk-like eyes. Behind them was my neighbor from across the street, Mrs. Patterson, the same woman who used to slip me groceries when she saw how Khadija was treating me. A sound came from the kitchen. Someone dropped something. I glanced back. Over the plates of food, 3 faces were frozen. Akeem, Khadija, Imani. They looked like they were staring at a gallows. I stepped aside and opened the door wide. "Come in," I said. "Please enter." They walked into the hall. The police officer scanned the house with a quick eye. Alistair gave me a professional nod, and Mrs. Patterson squeezed my hand as she passed. In her grip was more support than I'd felt from my family in years. We walked into the kitchen. Khadija jumped up so fast her chair screeched. "Who are you people? Who gave you permission to barge into my house? I'm calling the cops for trespassing." I didn't even have to open my mouth. The officer answered for me. "The police are already here, ma'am," he said dryly, showing his badge. "Acting on a complaint from the owner and a court order." "What owner?" Khadija gasped. "Me and my husband live here." I turned to her. "Your house?" I asked softly. The kitchen went silent again. "No, Khadija. This is still my home, and that is why you are currently standing on private property without a lease." Alistair set his briefcase on the edge of the table, carefully moving a plate. "Good morning," he said politely. "Alistair Thorne, counsel for Makeda Vance. We are here to execute a court order and several investigative mandates." Khadijah's lips trembled. "What order? This is nonsense! We have a doctor's evaluation saying she's incompetent." She grabbed a folder from the counter. "Read it. She's aggressive, delusional. She needs to be institutionalized. She threatened to poison us. We barely escaped." The officer didn't even reach for it. "We've already reviewed your papers, ma'am," he said, "and Dr. Sterling is currently giving a statement elsewhere regarding bribery and falsifying medical records." Alistair opened his briefcase and pulled out a thin folder with a red seal. "And this," he opened it toward Khadijah, "is the official psychiatric evaluation from the State Board. Makeda Vance is of sound mind, memory intact, full capacity." 100%! Khadijah went white. "It can't be. She's... She was sputtering, looking for an out. Alistair set the folder aside and pulled out his phone. "And that's not all. Please, listen to this recording." He tapped the screen. In the silence of the kitchen, familiar voices filled the air, and even though I knew what was coming, I felt a chill. "Don't worry, Mama." Khadijah's voice was unmistakable. $2,000 and the doctor's conscience gets real flexible. Sterling has everything ready. We'll say she had a fit. Akeem barely held her back. Then Amani's voice. "Right on, baby. We'll dump her in Silver Oaks, sell the house, and live like real people. Akeem is soft. He'll do what we say." Every word was crystal clear. Khadijah gripped her chair as if her legs were giving out. How did you record that?" she whispered. I smirked. "In the middle of the night, while you were whispering in the kitchen," I said. "My old phone was sitting right above you in the cabinet. I may be old, but I'm not deaf, and I'm not stupid. I can still hit a record button." Amani had been quiet, but now she snapped. "People say things when they're drinking. That ain't evidence. We've been slandered. That tape is a fake." The officer looked at her so hard she withered. "The recording has already been authenticated," he said. "The voices are yours. No edits. But if you want, you can repeat that story to a detective." He turned to a younger officer at the door. "Officer, connect the drive to the TV. Let's start with the video." We all walked into the living room. Behind us, like prisoners, came Akeem, Khadijah, and Amani. The TV flickered to life. The camera angle was from the corner of the ceiling. "Recording from Christmas night," the officer explained. We watched in silence as Akeem jumped up from the table. You could hear him scream, "Shut up, Ma!" You could see the chair fly back, and then that sound, the slap, sharp, loud. You saw my head snap back, my hair fall, me clutching my cheek. In the next shot, you saw the blood on my lip. In the room, Akeem flinched as if he'd been hit himself. "Enough," he rasped. "Turn it off." But it continued. You heard Amani laughing. You saw Khadijah smirking. Nobody moved to help me. The screen went black for a second. Then another file started. The kitchen. Khadijah was holding my husband's photo frame. She turned it in her hands, smiled, and then, accidentally, dropped it. You heard the glass shatter. Khadijah let out a theatrical scream, fell down next to the glass, and started yelling like I'd pushed her. And on the tape, you could see me rushing toward the photo, not toward her, but toward my husband's picture. The TV was switched off. The silence was so heavy, you could hear the radiator humming. I looked at Akeem. "I put that camera up a month ago," I said quietly. "I thought I'd use it to record our happy evenings. Son, wife, grandkids. I wanted to keep the warm moments. Instead, I caught this." Akeem lowered his head. His face was as gray as the walls. The officer stepped toward him. "Akeem Vance, you are being detained on suspicion of assault and elder abuse." He pulled out handcuffs. The metal jingled. Khadijah rushed toward him. "Wait! He just lost his temper! It's a family thing! We'll handle it! There was no abuse! "Enough, Khadijah!" Alistair cut her off. "You've said enough to build a separate case." He pulled another paper from his briefcase. "This is a court order," he said. "Akeem will remain in custody pending a hearing, and this," he unfolded a second document, "is an eviction notice. Makeda Vance is the sole owner of this property. Khadijah Vance and Imani Vance, you have 30 minutes to pack your personal belongings and vacate the premises. Only personal items. Furniture, electronics, appliances, they stay. If you try to take them, it's grand larceny." Khadijah stared at the paper like it was a death warrant. "You can't," she whispered. "You can't throw a pregnant woman out on the street." She turned to me, falling to her knees, grabbing my dress. "Mama, please, I'm carrying your grandchild. You're going to throw your own blood out?" I looked at her tear-streaked face. I stayed silent for a moment, letting her finish her act. Then I slowly leaned down and pulled my dress from her fingers. "My lawyer checked your insurance records this morning, Khadijah," I said without a trace of pity. "You had a tubal ligation 3 years ago because you didn't want to ruin your body. You ain't carrying nothing but greed." Khadijah stopped breathing. Even Imani was speechless, staring at her daughter. "There is no grandchild," I continued. "Just a big, bloated lie." The officer checked his watch. "Time's ticking," he said. 30 minutes. Pack up." Khadijah stayed on her knees, stunned. I knew the hardest part was coming, because while their things were being settled now, their consciences would be settled later, and no lawyer could help them with that. The officer clicked the cuffs onto Akeem's wrists behind his back. The sound made my stomach flip. "Ma," he said, looking at me for the first time. Sober, without the bravado. "What are you doing? I'm your son. You're really going to send me to jail?" He was pale, his lips trembling. But I had known that look for too many years. It was self-pity, not remorse. I gripped the table to keep my hands from shaking. I took a step toward him. "I'm not sending you anywhere, Akeem," I said quietly. "You walked there yourself. I'm just not standing in your way anymore." He lunged toward me, but the officer held him back. "Ma, sign the waiver. Tell them it's a family matter. I'll fix it, I swear." I walked closer and put my palm on his cheek, where I used to kiss him goodnight. Stubble, salty sweat, panic. "Fixing it should have happened before you hit me," I said. "I didn't put you in this seat, Akeem. You sat there yourself." He squeezed his eyes shut. Tears fell. "Ma, forgive me. Please." I took my hand away. "I already forgave you," I said. "But I won't stop the consequences. There are mistakes you don't pay for in the kitchen. You pay for them in court." He gasped. "Then why did you feed us? Why this breakfast? These collard greens?" I looked at the unfinished plate. "So you'd remember," I answered. "In a cell, nobody's going to cook for you. You're going to eat what they give you, and every time you crave a home-cooked meal, you'll remember the day you hit the woman who cooked for you your whole life." He lowered his head. The officers let him out. The door slammed. Khadijah and Imani were frantic, dragging clothes out of closets, screaming at each other. "This is mine!" Khadijah shrieked, grabbing a vase. "I bought it! With what money, you liar?" Imani snapped. "I paid for it with my Social Security." The officer at the door reminded them, personal items only, clothes, papers, makeup, everything else belongs to the owner. They had to leave the vase, the china, everything they had claimed was theirs. 20 minutes later, they were out on the sidewalk, surrounded by bags, Khadijah's mascara running, and Imani shaking with rage. I didn't see them out. I just shut the door. The siren of the police car faded down the street. The house was strangely empty. It was mine again, but I felt like a survivor of a bombing. The table was still set. The food was cold. The gumbo had a film on top. The cocoa was a brown crust. I slowly began to clean up. Akeem's plate was half finished. I scraped the remains into the trash. The sound was like dirt hitting a coffin. I sat in his chair and ran my hand over the table. The tears were gone. They had run out that night I listened to them talk. Only a void remained. I had won. But the taste of victory wasn't sweet. It was bitter, like burnt sugar. Later, I heard how Khadijah and her mother ended up. In a rough part of the city, in a crumbling apartment building with peeling paint and the smell of mildew. There, In a cramped studio with stained wallpaper, they sat on a folding couch surrounded by trash bags. Khadijah was no longer the queen in silk. She was exhausted, wearing a cheap market sweater, her eyes dull. Imani sat by the window, counting change from an old purse. "It's all your fault!" Khadijah shrieked, throwing a fake designer bag on the floor. "You said she was losing it. You said she'd sign. Now my husband's in jail and we're living like bums." "Oh, shut up," Imani snapped back. "If you were so smart, why couldn't you trick one old man? I told you to get the papers sooner. You wanted renovations and yoga studios, and you played yourself." They threw words like mud, then grabbed each other's hair, screaming. All the mommy and baby talk was gone. They were just two bitter women with no prey left to feed on. Their greed, having no more food, started eating itself. Meanwhile, Akeem was learning a different life. County jail. The damp smell, the heavy air, the iron doors. He was in a cell with 10 other men. A big man with a broken nose walked up to him. "Hey, banker, you got a smoke?" "I don't smoke," Akeem stammered. "Then get out of my spot." The man kicked him. Akeem slid onto the concrete floor, his stomach cramped from hunger. He stared through the small barred window and waited. He was sure I would come. That was how his life worked. He'd mess up, and I'd save him. From the principal, from the bank, from debt. An hour passed, then 3. Nobody came. That night, he felt the real cold of the walls and the metal. The only warm image in his head was me in the kitchen with a pot of gumbo, and the sound of his hand hitting my face. That sound wouldn't go away. The next morning, the cell door clanged. "Vance, you got a visitor." Akeem's heart jumped. "Mama," he thought. He ran to the glass, but when the door opened, it wasn't me. It was Alistair Thorne. He had a plastic container wrapped in a towel. Akeem's smile died. "Where's Ma? She didn't come? She changed her mind, right?" Alistair sat down and put the container on the table. "Your mother asked me to bring this," he said. "Bring what? A waiver? A letter?" "Breakfast," the lawyer replied. "The meal you didn't finish yesterday?" He opened the lid. The scent hit the room. Warm, home-cooked, collard stuffed cabbage. Akeem realized he was lightheaded from hunger. "She didn't drop the charges?" he asked, hoping for a thread. Alistair paused. "No, and she won't. I didn't bring you a waiver, Akeem. I brought you a chance to finally be a man." "What chance? I'm going to prison. You're a lawyer. You're supposed to convince her." "I am a lawyer," Alistair said dryly. "And your mother isn't a child. She made her decision. She said one thing I promised to tell you." Akeem froze. "What?" "Let him stay cold for a bit, so he understands the warmth of a parent. Let him stay hungry, so he remembers the taste of a home." Those were her words. "She doesn't want you dead. She wants a new man to be born." Akeem's lip trembled. He turned to the window. Alistair pushed the container closer. "Eat. It's the only thing she agreed to send." Akeem took it with both hands. He bit into a roll. That taste, soft rice, savory meat, the sweetness of the greens, the taste he had taken for granted his whole life. With the first bite, he held it together. With the second, his eyes filled. By the third, he broke. He put his head on the table, clutching the container like a child. "Ma," he sobbed. "Ma, why?" He ate and he wept, like a man who finally realized he had lost the only thing that mattered. Alistair watched, sighed, and stood up. "Finish up. I'll tell her you're alive, but who you are when you get out, that's not a question for a lawyer." He left Akeem alone with the food and the shame. And the big question hung in the air. Would he change enough for his mother to ever open the door again? The house was quiet. That night, I lit a candle at my husband's desk. I had just finished a letter to Akeem. I had written it many times, tearing it up and starting over. There was no "my poor boy" in it. It was about what I saw, what I felt, and why I didn't take the complaint back, and that he had a chance to return. but as someone else. I folded the paper and put it in a drawer. "Not yet," I whispered. "Tears aren't enough. Your soul has to be cleaned by your own shame, Akeem. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's making sure it never happens again." December 2025. Another Christmas Eve. Chicago's wind is howling through the south side. In most windows, lights are twinkling. My house is simpler. A small tree in the corner. Old chipped ornaments. The radio is playing some old blues. I'm wiping the dust from my husband's photo. I only replaced the frame, the simple, sturdy wooden one. I didn't fix the scratch on the photo itself. Let it stay. A scar. To remind me what happens when you stay silent. I go to the kitchen. A pot of gumbo is bubbling. 2 bowls, 2 spoons. I didn't invite guests, but I set 2 places, because I don't know if I'll eat alone or if someone will walk in. If you come, good, I say aloud. If not, I've learned to be alone. Elsewhere, at a night market on the edge of the city, Khadijah is standing behind a stall of cheap clothes. In a worn jacket, her makeup faded, she's yelling over the crowd. Jackets, jeans, everything on sale. Beside her, Imani counts change, grumbling. Khadijah watches an expensive car drive by. There's no guilt in her eyes. Only envy. "I could have been in that house," she hisses. For them, greed is the life sentence. Meanwhile, in a woodshop on the outskirts, Akeem finishes his shift. In prison, he learned carpentry. He learned to sand wood, fix chairs, build things. He learned to be tired from work, not from partying. He received his first paycheck in late December. He sat on a bench, looking at the money, thinking that for the first time in 30 years, he was bringing home something he earned, not something he begged for. At 8 p.m., a quiet knock came at my door. Not a loud, arrogant knock, a hesitant one. My heart dropped. I walked to the hall. "Who is it?" "It's me," a voice said. I opened the door. On the porch stood a man who looked different, thinner, tanned, in a simple flannel shirt and clean trousers. His hands were covered in small nicks and splinters. He held a brown envelope. "Hello, Mama," he said softly. I wanted to hug him. I wanted to slam the door. I chose to just look. "I won't stay long," he said quickly. He held out the envelope. "My first pay. I'm working at a furniture shop. It's not much, but I want you to have it. For everything." The words "for everything" hung there. For the slap, for the years of taking, for the nights I prayed for him. I looked at the envelope. I could have taken it as a payment, but that wouldn't be the truth. I pushed the envelope back. "Keep it," I said. "You're a man now. I took what I needed by seeing you work for yourself." He looked lost. "You won't take even a part?" "No," I said. "I'm old. I don't need much. You look cold. Come in. The gumbo's getting cold." He froze. "You're really letting me in?" "For dinner," I nodded. "Living here? That's a different conversation." "This is enough," he said, stepping over the threshold. We sat at the table, same kitchen, same light, but he was different. He pulled up his stool, and it wobbled. The leg had been cracked since the night he knocked it over. "Careful," I said. "Wait," he muttered. He went to the hall, grabbed a small toolkit, and knelt by the stool. He tightened the bolts, sanded a spot, fixed it. 5 minutes later, it was solid. "Fixed," he said. "Slowly, I'll fix everything I broke, if you let me." I served the gumbo. We ate in silence, but it wasn't the silence of before. It was a new, awkward, but not a stranger's silence. Sometimes he looked up, wanting to say something, but he couldn't find the words. I didn't rush him. My job was to see if he could sit there without hiding. When the bowls were empty, he reached for the rag, wiped the table, and took the dishes to the sink. "I remember you asking me to do this as a kid," he said. "I thought it wasn't a man's job. In jail, washing your bowl is an honor. If you don't do it, you eat out of a dirty one." "It takes time to learn," I said. "Ma, he began, leaning against the sink. "I thought about you a lot. About that night, how you stood there with your hand on your cheek and stayed silent. I realized I wasn't just punished for hitting you, I was punished for all the years I treated you like an ATM and a maid." He exhaled. "I don't ask you to forget. If one day you can say you aren't ashamed of me, I'd give my life for that." I looked at him for a long time. I saw a man, not a boy. "I don't know if I can," I said honestly. "I'm not God. I can't erase the past. But tonight, I am not ashamed of you. Tonight, you came with work in your hands and a fixed chair. That's a start." He wept, turning to the wall. "Can I come back sometimes?" he asked. "Not to live, just to fix things, the cabinets, the door, whatever you need." "We'll see," I said, "one day at a time. Work, stay sober, look in the mirror. I don't want to see that other man ever again." "You won't," he said. "He's gone." He left soon after. The door shut softly. I went back to the living room and looked at my husband's clock. "Well," I said to the silence, "a new chapter." The story you just heard is about more than just revenge. It's about the difference between blind enabling and real love. A mother striking back doesn't have to be with a hand. It can be with boundaries. Makeda Vance didn't stop being a mother. She started being a woman with dignity. Forgiveness doesn't mean making the pain go away and pretending it never happened. It means calling a thing by its name and moving forward with the truth. If you've ever been hurt by your own family, remember, setting a limit isn't a betrayal, it's self-respect. Did you like the story, and which city are you listening from? Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story, with love and respect.